I feel lost. I feel silenced. I felt very ineffective. I'm not suddenly running in and playing hero. I've had this connection with my grandchildren since all of them were born. And my hands are tied because as a grandparent, I've only got a few rights. And the few rights that I have found aren't really being observed inside the system.
So currently we're doing some research which is across, it's just been completed. We've had participants across 3 states and it's looking at grandparents and their role in supporting their grandchildren, particularly after they've come to the attention of Child Protection Services. So this study came from a smaller study funded by the national body, the AASW. One of the big points that came out of that smaller study was that when families come to the attention of Child Protection, some grandparents take on the care of the grandchildren, and some grandparents are in quite precarious situations about maintaining contact with their grandchildren. So we wanted to look at that topic in a bigger way, and the current study, which has had a story in the conversation, was about the emerging findings from that larger study. Sometimes grandparents are informal carers for their grandchildren, and sometimes they're formal carers. So when the Department of Child Protection, it's got different names in different states, becomes involved after children are deemed to be at risk and their parents are unwilling or unable to care for them, grandparents are able to step in. It's becoming very common, and there can be informal or formal arrangements made.
It's an idea, best practice model that they have. And the idea is that behind that you're meant to sit with all of the parties in the children's family, and that is supposed to result in a plan that moves the children forward in a direction that keeps their familial bonds intact. It keeps their psychological harm from, it keeps it minimised. It's supposed to help them maintain the good and positive aspects of the life that they had.
So I think there's challenges in both informal and formal care. So often if Child Protection Services have become involved, then more formal arrangements need to be made, and they'll assess grandparents. And there are benefits in that because grandparents often get paid and also get some support and other resources. Informal arrangements can be made so perhaps there hasn't been formal intervention, but children are seen at risk, and it might be better to remove them from where they are and place them with the grandparents with a view to once the parents are able to care for the children, they might be placed again. So I think there's benefits and challenges of both formal and informal care of grandparents for their grandchildren.
When grandparents, a couple who was looking after their grandchildren and had kind of worked that out with the department, so Child Protection was supporting that, and the parents were quite happy because they thought their own parents were doing a great job with the grandchildren, but now they were quite old and their health was declining, and so the department was just talking about, well, we need to move those kids on, and the grandparents were saying, hang on a sec, they are our family, why would you move them anywhere? And so sometimes you wonder, you could look at that as the best interest of the child, but really, if I'm old and looking after my kids and there's no child protection involved, nobody will interfere until something happens, people, and so those stories are confronting that I wonder, what are we doing to grandparents?
Well, I felt in a couple of scenarios through the interviews that I've done, there was that they're not listened to, they're not important, and yet grandparents, and with our Indigenous grandparents, most of them have brought the kids up from day one, but sometimes that's just put aside, and it doesn't mean anything to the powers. And another thing that come out in the interview was that they felt that child safety had too much power in removing the children. So Yeah, and that's the fear. Just going back to the stolen generation, you know, where the children were taken off the parents in those days, some of them feel that it's happening again.
There is research that says that children become very disconnected once they've been in care. They've often had many placements. They're very unsettled. They might come to the attention of mental health practitioners. So they struggle after being in care, and part of that is seen particularly for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children because of being disconnected from their families. So what grandparents in this study were saying is we can be a key stakeholder in helping the family stay connected.
I'm Debbie Henderson, the Executive Officer of the Family Inclusion Network of Western Australia. A significant number of the families who seek our assistance are grandparents. Grandparents often come to us hoping that we can help them gain contact with or care of their grandchildren. But grandparents tell us that they feel unheard in the system, disregarded and invisible. They also feel that they are often punished for the wrongdoing of their children. That's why this research with James Cook University was so critical, absolutely critical to elevate the voice, the experience, the stories of grandparents who have grandchildren in the care system.
I believe what's happening in social work here at JCU is some good things have been happening here so that our students will look at these jobs in the child safety.
I think social workers working in child protection always have very difficult decisions to make. It's very, very complex. Each family situation might be a bit different, and in the end they want to safeguard children. What grandparents in this study were saying is that if they were key stakeholders in the decision making around what was best for children, that children might have better outcomes in their lives at the moment, and also when they're older. So often children who lost contact with grandparents, when they exit care, they find it hard to reconnect with family. I guess one of the things grandparents were saying is if you keep grandparents connected across the time that children are in child protection, then they're a strong conduit back to the family and help children reconnect.
We know that we've seen a lost generation. We know what that does. And I don't understand why we're here at this point in time and we aren't fixing it.